With the situation unfolding so rapidly, it's hard to know what's going to happen next. Honestly, I debated whether it was even the right time to do a breakdown, but since so many of you have been asking, I want to take a snapshot of where things stand right now. Why did the US and Israel strike Iran, and where do we go from here? Hello and welcome back to Flat Archive. A lot happened this past weekend. On Saturday morning local time, the US and Israel launched military strikes against Iran. And as we all know by now, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was killed in the process. I know many of you subscribed to the channel have been waiting for this analysis. I had some personal matters to attend to, and I was actually right in the middle of producing our upcoming documentary on Abraham Lincoln. And to be completely transparent, while I cover a wide range of global issues, the Middle East is easily the most complex and challenging region for me to analyze. Unlike Europe or the West, where the political systems, economies, and cultures feel somewhat familiar, the Middle East is a different story. I don't have a deep first-hand understanding of the specific cultural mentality there, and I haven't spent extensive time in the region, which makes me even more cautious. So preparing this with the rigor it deserves took a bit of extra time. Today we're going to look at this largely through a US-centric lens. According to the original plans that surfaced, military strikes were initially slated for February 21st, right after negotiations broke down on the 17th. However, the White House reportedly held back on the final go order. Ultimately, the airstrikes took place a week later, on February 28th. It's been reported that Khamenei and his family members were killed in the strikes, alongside several high-ranking military officials. Word on the street is that targeting Khamenei and the Iranian top brass was the primary objective from day one. Up until that point, negotiations were technically still on the table. Oman and Iranian officials had even hinted at some progress, but the dominant narrative from the US side was that they were just talking in circles, repeatedly hitting a wall over their core differences. During these talks, the core demands laid out by Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff were straightforward. Iran had to completely halt uranium enrichment for 10 years, allowing only limited enrichment after that. In exchange, the US would provide nuclear fuel for civilian use. Iran flat out rejected the offer. The US allegedly issued a clear warning: if you reject this, all military options are on the table. But when you look at the fate of other dictators and nations that gave up their nuclear programs, it's not hard to see why the Iranian leadership couldn't accept the deal. In a way, a military strike against Iran seemed like an inevitable conclusion. A lot of people are questioning this timing and offering their own theories. President Trump is famously averse to spending American tax dollars on foreign conflicts. So following the Venezuela situation earlier this year, the biggest question is, why use the extreme measure of striking Iran right now? There are rumors floating around that the Trump administration used this as a wag the dog scenario, a distraction from the Epstein file controversy, or to pivot public attention away from the border and ICE issues that have been hurting his approval ratings. Personally, I don't buy that. Yes, the Epstein files are causing a massive uproar here in the States, but that list implicates plenty of Democrats and left-leaning celebrities as well. It doesn't make sense for Trump to take such a massive geopolitical gamble just to cover that up. The theory that he wanted to project a strongman image ahead of the midterms also feels like a stretch. The midterms aren't until November, which is an eternity in politics. More importantly, foreign policy rarely moves the needle in American elections. That's true not just in the US, but almost anywhere. What really matters is kitchen table economics. Wall Street might be saying that economic indicators and employment numbers look fine, but everyday Americans don't feel macroeconomic data. They feel the price of a pound of ground beef at the supermarket. They feel it when a gallon of gas costs more than it did a month ago. Whether this war is short or long, it's going to shock oil prices and the global economy, not to mention the risk of American casualties. And getting bogged down in foreign wars is arguably what the MAGA base hates most. When you weigh the options, the political risks far outweigh the rewards. So no, this wasn't a distraction tactic. So, if not a distraction, a complex mix of other factors must have been at play. Ultimately, it seems the US and Israel decided that the time was finally right to execute a military operation they had been planning for a long time. It's also highly likely that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu aggressively lobbied Washington. Iran's nuclear program, ballistic missiles, and military drone tech are advancing rapidly. There was a massive sense of urgency that if they kept dragging their feet, Iran could become the next North Korea of the Middle East. It might be hard for some of us to grasp just how terrifying a nuclear-armed Iran is, but Israel and the US clearly view it as a much more direct and lethal threat than even North Korea's arsenal. Why? Because Iran isn't confined within its own borders. Its proxy militias, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and the Houthis in Yemen, are spread across the Middle East. There's zero guarantee that Iranian nuclear weapons or technology would stay quietly inside Iran. But right now, Iran is incredibly vulnerable internally. They faced massive anti-hijab protests 2 years ago, and anti-government riots flared up again recently. Their economy is in ruins. On top of that, Israel's relentless strikes have decapitated the leadership of Iran's top proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas. Over in Syria, the fall of the Assad dictatorship has paved the way for a more pro-Western regime. Iran's ally Russia has its hands full in Ukraine, and China is doing nothing but offering lip service from the sidelines. From Washington and Jerusalem's perspective, there has never been a better window to strike. It's a massive gamble, but they likely concluded, if we're going to do this, it has to be now. And it wasn't just Israel. According to the Washington Post, Saudi Arabia was quietly urging the U.S. to strike as well. Crown Prince M.B.S. reportedly made several phone calls pushing for action, though Riyadh officially denies this. Let's not forget, M.B.S. has publicly warned that if Iran gets the bomb, Saudi Arabia will get one too. So fundamentally, why did the U.S. take this risk? If you look at the newly released 2025 National Security Strategy and National Defense Strategy, the message is loud and clear. America wants to pack its bags and pivot out of the Middle East. And to do that safely, they have to permanently remove the biggest sources of instability in the region. The U.S. can only step back comfortably if Iran's nuclear ambitions, ballistic missile threats, and threats to close the Strait of Hormuz are completely neutralized. To achieve this, Washington envisions normalizing ties between Israel and the Gulf Arab states and establishing a fully integrated regional defense system known as M.E.A.D, Middle East Air Defense. M.E.A.D is designed to link advanced U.S. and Israeli interception tech with the defense grids of the Gulf states. Simply put, instead of each country trying to shoot down an incoming missile from Iran or the Houthis right over their own capital, the entire region would share a unified radar system to detect launches instantly and intercept them at the closest, most efficient point. Once M.E.A.D is fully operational, the security of the Middle East essentially gets handed over to Israel and its Gulf allies. The U.S. can take a step back and just provide system management and oversight. In a way, America's current strategy feels very reminiscent of the Nixon Doctrine approach. I actually think many of Trump's foreign policies echo the Nixon era. The message is, America is no longer going to be the policeman of the world. You need to secure your own neighborhood. The goal is to have allies check the regional hegemon, Iran, or to empower an ally to become the dominant force that maintains order. Through that lens, the Abraham Accords signed during Trump's first term in 2020 were the foundation of this grand strategy. Since those accords, Israel has deepened its economic and military ties with the Gulf states. The Abraham Accords built the diplomatic and economic framework, and M.E.A.D is the security roof being placed on top of it. Why the rush to clean up the Middle East? Because the U.S. needs to pivot its resources to face its true global rival, China. America has to ruthlessly prioritize its national resources right now, and containing China is undeniably priority number one. By securing the Middle East, the U.S. is freeing up its hands to go all in on the Indo-Pacific. This perfectly aligns with the demands Washington is making of its allies globally. It's the same logic behind pressuring key allies like South Korea to take the lead in their own defense against North Korea. The latest NSS and NDS explicitly mandate that allies take greater responsibility for their own security. So, what does the U.S. want Iran to look like after the dust settles? For starters, this isn't going to look anything like the George W. Bush era, where massive ground forces invaded Iraq. The U.S. seems to have zero appetite for nation-building. They aren't trying to force a Western-style liberal democracy onto Iran. One of the more fascinating rumors circulating in Washington is the existence of a no-kill list. The idea was to spare certain pragmatic, moderate figures within the Iranian leadership. This suggests the U.S. doesn't want total state collapse. They'd be perfectly happy to see a functional, semi-friendly regime take over, led by people they can negotiate with. You can hear this in Trump's own rhetoric. He recently stated that the U.S. has set the stage, and now it's up to the Iranian people to stand up and finish the job. Washington is acutely aware that forcibly installing a democracy usually ends in a bloody quagmire. However, many are skeptical that this scenario will play out as smoothly as the U.S. hopes. Yes, millions of Iranians despise the hardline theocracy, but there is also a massive faction that deeply supports the regime and benefits from its immense wealth and power. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, isn't just a military unit, it is a sprawling economic cartel that controls Iran's core industries and infrastructure. As Machiavelli famously said, men forget more easily the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony. When there's this much money and power at stake, is it really possible to force the ruling class to just hand over the keys? This is why many analysts are predicting a brutal, bloody power struggle within Iran. Perhaps that's why Trump, who initially boasted this would be over very quickly, has started walking back his comments, hinting at a longer haul. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth also left the door slightly open, refusing to categorically rule out the use of ground troops. So where does the war go from here? Winston Churchill once said that nothing is more futile than trying to predict the course of a war. Right now, Iran isn't just taking the hits, they are launching retaliatory strikes against Gulf nations hosting U.S. bases, and reports are coming in that they've hit key Saudi Aramco oil facilities with drones. This looks like classic asymmetric warfare. Iran's strategy is to create chaos across the Middle East, shock the global energy markets, and terrify America's regional allies so much that they beg Washington to stop the war. Of course, this indiscriminate bombing could completely backfire and unite the Arab world even further against Iran. We'll have to wait and see which pressure point gives first. The real danger for the U.S. is that as time goes on, American casualties become inevitable. If U.S. troops start coming home in flag-draped coffins, domestic opinion will tank rapidly. The American public still has massive PTSD from the Iraq War and the nightmare of getting stuck in Middle Eastern conflicts. Amidst all this chaos, Iran must be feeling pretty abandoned by their so-called ally, China. Since the conflict erupted, Beijing has shown almost zero geopolitical presence or willingness to intervene. However, this crisis is bound to deal a massive blow to China's economy, which grinds to a halt without massive energy imports. China is the world's largest energy importer, and they rely on Iran directly for about 13% of their seaborne crude oil. But it's not just about Iranian oil. If Iran, as a last resort, decides to completely blockade the Strait of Hormuz, the entire crude and LNG supply chain from the Middle East to Asia will be paralyzed. If this turns into a protracted war, it will hit the Achilles heel of an already struggling Chinese economy. The situation on the ground is changing by the hour, and as I mentioned, predicting the ultimate outcome right now is nearly impossible. So for today, I've focused on summarizing the current battlefield realities and the strategic intentions driving the U.S. I wish I could bring you even deeper insights and more on-the-ground updates. As soon as I have time, I'll be back with a video that dives deeper into the historical context of exactly why the U.S. and Iran became such bitter enemies, along with a detailed breakdown of America's rapidly shifting global security strategy.